Sony just released an update for both the FX3 and the FX30, essentially adding the same features to both cameras. The FX3 is now on version 3.0 and the FX30 is on version 2.0. So is the FX3 finally even more of a cinema camera? Well, let's jump into what exactly Sony added in this update right over here. Alright, so to make sure I don't mess this up, I've got it on my phone over here, what exactly they've added into this update. So first things first, they've added 24 frames per second shooting. Now, I know this isn't a huge difference or a huge deal, but this really is the true cinematic frame rate, if you want to call it that is used in true cinema cameras and in something like movie theaters. So it will now use 1/48th of a second for the shutter speed instead of 1/50th if you were following the 180-degree rule. So previously, it would be shooting at 23.976 for the frame rate, and you would have to shoot at 1/50th of a second. So now it is truly 24 frames per second, and you'll be able to shoot at 1/48th of a second. So again, I know this is a minor change and it might not be that apparent to you when you're looking at the footage. This is truly the cinematic look now. And that brings me to the next change, which is shooting in 4K DCI. So to shoot in 24 frames per second, you will have to set your camera's recording settings to 4K DCI instead of the older previous settings that would have been shooting at your UHD or Ultra HD resolution of 3840 by 2160. So with 4K DCI, it is actually a resolution of 4096 by 2160. So you do have the same height in terms of pixels, but now you've got a little bit of a wider image with 4096 instead of the 3840 pixels. So again, this is bringing things more in tune with the true cinematic look or aspect ratios or resolutions, if you want to call it that. So this is what is displayed in cinemas or in movie theaters worldwide. So some would call this the true 4K resolution versus just 4K UHD or Ultra HD. So if you're still going to be outputting your videos as something standard like 3840 by 2160 for something like YouTube, you'll actually have a little bit of extra space to play with here, so you can actually slide your frame from left to right if you want to be using that for your videos. Now, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same thing as being able to crop in or zoom in if you were shooting in 4K but setting up a 1080p timeline, because that'll truly allow you to zoom in quite a bit further, since your timeline and your footage will essentially be at 1080p resolution. So you have a lot more resolution to play with by shooting it in 4K. But with this, again, you're just gaining a little bit of extra room on both sides, on the left and the right, so you can actually slide your frame around if you really want to, if that makes a difference for you. And going back to frame rate for a second here, in this 4K DCI mode, you can also choose to shoot in 48 frames per second if you shoot in the S and Q mode. So Sony's S and Q mode is for slow and quick. So that allows you to shoot in a higher frame rate to be able to slow down your footage to get slow-mo, where it will be that nice, smooth slow motion footage, but without having to commit to the slow-mo look. So if you're not sure if you want to shoot in slow motion or in regular speed, shoot in S and Q mode, because it'll not only allow you to have your slow motion footage shooting in 48 frames per second, but it'll actually allow you to play it back at 24 frames per second as well, without having that kind of jittery look. Okay, the next thing Sony added to this update is an anamorphic de-squeeze. So unfortunately, I don't have an anamorphic lens to test this out with right now, but essentially with anamorphic lenses, they're shooting a wider field of view, but it is still using the same sensor obviously on your camera, so that wider image is actually squeezed into the standard frame of your sensor. So this will typically look like squished footage on the back of your camera when you are recording. So that can actually be quite challenging to be framing your shots properly, because you've got all this extra information, all this extra image that is squeezed into something like a 16:9 aspect ratio that you're recording in. Typically, with anamorphic footage, you would de-squeeze it in post, so that's where you'll get that extra wide, beautiful, cinematic looking footage. But until now, Sony didn't allow you to de-squeeze it when you're previewing it while you're filming on the camera. So this is definitely a welcome addition for all of you anamorphic shooters out there. Now, for some reason, Sony still doesn't allow you to set this as a custom preset or a shortcut button on your menu system, so you actually have to always go through the menu system for the anamorphic de-squeeze if you want to be turning it on and off. So that's a little bit of a pain. Not sure why Sony did that, to be honest, but hopefully they fix that in a future update as well. Now, the only other caveat here is that there are only two options for this anamorphic de-squeeze: 1.3 times and 2 times. So there are typically a lot of different anamorphic lenses out there that do have different squeeze factors, if you want to call it that. So this only supports the two, 1.3 and 2.0. So it would have been nice if they included different ones as well. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure why they didn't, because this just seems to be a simple programming software thing. So again, hopefully that's something they'll add in the future to a future update. All right, the next feature that has been added to this update is focus breathing compensation. Now, this is actually quite a big addition to this update right over here. So typically with cheaper cinema lenses, or just a lot of other lenses as well, you will notice focus breathing, which is when you are racking focus, it almost looks like the image is zooming in and zooming out as you are focusing further into distance and closer back to you. More expensive true cinema lenses actually have virtually no focus breathing, so this feature actually helps bring cheaper lenses much closer to that true cinematic cinema lens look. Now, when you turn this feature on, you will notice that it does zoom in a little bit. It crops the image just a little bit, but in my eyes, I think this is worth it to really upgrade the look of your footage by making it look much higher end with this focus breathing compensation. Now, the next feature that has been added to this update here is the addition of a camera ID feature. So this is great for file organization, and especially when you're shooting with different cameras from Sony's cinema lineup. So if you're going over into the shooting settings, then go to file settings, now you can choose an option that's cam ID and real number settings. So you can now change the camera ID. So for example, you can use A cam, B cam, etc. You can set your real number and your position. This is still a minor addition or minor add-on, but it really does help bridge the gap and makes the FX3 much closer to being a true cinema camera. All these little things do add up, and we are getting much closer to having pretty much everything you'd expect from a true cinema camera. So again, this is a very welcome addition. And looking back over on my phone over here, everything just moved around. The final addition to this update is actually being able to update the firmware via your smartphone using a new app that Sony has developed. So after you update your FX3 to the version 3.0 or your FX30 to version 2.0, from this point forward, you will now be able to update to future software updates using the app. So you don't have to plug your camera into your computer and download the software that way and send it over wire to your camera to update it. So that is pretty handy, especially if you were traveling and a new update comes out. That is very exciting and adds features that you really want to have, and you can't wait until you get back home or get back to your computer to have to wire in. So that's a very convenient feature. And this new app also replaces the Imaging Edge app, which again, for a long time, Sony's apps have been very lackluster, just not been all that great. This app apparently solves a lot of connectivity issues, and it's much quicker to connect this app to your camera. So we'll see. I haven't played around with it yet. I'm going to try it out soon, but I'll probably dive deeper into that in a future video. So how do I feel about this update after using the FX3 for 2 years now? Well, I actually like it quite a lot. I know it's not a huge deal, and these aren't huge groundbreaking features they've added to the FX3 and the FX30, so we definitely shouldn't be applauding Sony for doing this, because these are absolutely features that should have been included in the FX3 from the get-go. They always branded this camera as being part of the cinema lineup, and it was definitely missing a lot of features that all of the cinema cameras, especially the other cameras in Sony's own lineup of cinema cameras, have, so it just kind of didn't make sense to me that a lot of these features were missing. Again, not to be negative here, it just kind of blows my mind that Sony didn't include a lot of these features in the initial version, but I still think it's a great thing that they are slowly adding these features back into it. The version 2.0 update actually added quite a few good features that really helped bridge that gap, again, bringing it much closer to being a cinema camera, while still leaving out some of these features that are now included here. So Sony is actually working on this. They're listening to everyone's complaints, so that is a positive in my eyes. But there are still a couple of features missing that I think would really help make this camera truly a full cinema camera. And I did hear that they are potentially going to be adding a couple of these things in the near future. Fingers crossed. We'll see. But I really think once they add shutter angle and even some type of false colors monitoring, that is what would truly help maybe set this apart and make it a true cinema camera. If they add those features in a future update, I'm not too sure what else is actually missing anymore to make this not be considered a full cinema camera. So I'd love to know what you think of this update for the FX3 and the FX30 for that matter. Does this update really make the FX3 a true cinema camera, or do you think it is still missing something? And if you think it is missing something, what do you still want to see in the next version of the FX3? Let me know in the comments down below. And with that, I'm Alex Perry. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Ciao for now.